starting the recording now. So that way that if you do have to leave or anything, it will be recorded. And so welcome. Thank you for joining in on a Friday afternoon. I am excited to do this session and talk about artificial intelligence and share information with you about what I've been doing in my classroom and how I've learned about artificial intelligence. And so just a reminder that your audio is turned off. And of course, if you have questions or anything, please drop it in the chat, or my contact information I'll be sharing throughout as well. You can also tweet and use the hashtag #LearningRevolution during the session or after. And this that I'm going to talk to you about today is how to teach about artificial intelligence, some ideas, things that you can look at, different websites, activities that you could do just either on your own to explore or with students, if you're working with your students in your classroom, or if you're a tech coach and you're trying to help teachers get started with learning about AI. For me, to contact me anyway, if it's Twitter, the Dene 915, I have a blog, it's the same, I'm very consistent. My email is the same, rdene915@gmail. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Rachelle Dene Poth. I am a Spanish and STEAM teacher, also work as a consultant and an attorney. So I love learning, love education, and have been involved in a lot of different learning networks over the past probably 6 years since I got my master's degree in instructional technology. But I also have taught French. And actually, when I graduated Penn State, I was certified to teach French, but I had to go back and get my degree in Spanish to be able to find a long-term teaching job, which I've been at my current school for a while now. And people are often wondering, like, how is the Spanish teacher teaching about things like artificial intelligence and augmented virtual reality? And it's because a few years ago, our school changed our library into a makerspace. We had a grant, and so we moved from STEM to STEAM. And since I taught languages, I was asked to teach hummingbird robots. I had no idea what that was at the time. And then I figured out that it was programming these robots, and it's Bird Brain Technologies, which is actually from Pittsburgh. And so I did that for a year, but then they moved that to the 7th grade instead of the 8th. And I had an opportunity to come up with something new. And so when my principal asked me about it, I said, you know what, I'd kind of like to teach. And I named a bunch of different topics that I thought were interesting, that students needed to know, especially some basic things like digital citizenship, learning about how to use technology, interact in those spaces, and then going to more emerging technology trends. So that's where the augmented virtual reality came in, and also the artificial intelligence. And I do a lot of writing. I've written a couple books in the last year, and I do a lot of blogging for Getting Smart and some other publications, which is where my interest in artificial intelligence came from, because it's easy for us to talk about what we do in our classroom and share our experiences, our failures, whatever it is that we're trying. But I wanted to stretch myself a little bit. And so they had themes. And one of the themes a couple of years ago in January was artificial intelligence. So I did some research and wrote my first blog, and I was amazed at what I found out and continued to learn about it. And then eventually I took the course with ISTE on artificial intelligence and really became a lot more interested in it. And so I've tried to share a lot of that with my students and get them involved in a lot of different learning experiences. So today, the biggest thing is to look at, to look at what is artificial intelligence, what is machine learning, how can we use this in education, or how can we help our students to learn about these things that are in our daily lives and we may not realize it. And I know that one concern a lot of people always come back to is that, will artificial intelligence replace teachers, or will people lose jobs? And a lot of concerns about what does it mean for the future, and of course, what does it mean for right now? But understanding the differences of them, and we might all have our reference of, when you think of artificial intelligence, what do you think of? And for me, initially, I was thinking back to movies like Terminator or anything like that. Even Minority Report was another movie of just what my perception was. I, Robot with Will Smith was another one that I would think of. And I noticed that other people had some of the same thoughts about it. And so interesting to find out exactly what it is and how much we are already using it in our daily lives and may not even realize it. There was some surveys and polls that went out, and it said that about 60 to 65% of people don't even realize that they're interacting with artificial intelligence on a daily basis, just because we use different tools and apps or have other things that we engage in online, that it just happens. And I'd spoken to somebody 2 years ago who said the thing about artificial intelligence is you shouldn't notice that it's working and that it's there, because it's just doing what it's been programmed to do. And so today I'll be sharing with you some definitions, some examples, show you some ways to get started with it, to explore, and then share some additional resources at the end if you want to look at some books or some blogs or some websites. And of course, you can reach out to me at any time if you have questions, and I will share some resources on the Learning Revolution site that connect you with some videos that you could use for your classroom or your teachers, some articles, like I said, to check out. So the biggest thing is, what is artificial intelligence? Well, it's machines, they are machines that can basically do a lot of the same things that we can do as humans, reason and plan and understand, but they can do it faster. But the idea is it uses all of this data. So think about us as educators. If we give students assessments and the amount of time it takes us to correct something or to give the students the feedback and to sort through all of that information, when artificial intelligence is built into some of the platforms that we use, it's done so much faster. And so it makes things happen in a way more streamlined, faster way than it would if it were humans doing it. Now, the piece that concerns people is, well, can it replace teachers? But we still need that human connection and that time to interact with our students and to build the relationships. And so that's where it draws the line. And a lot of people realize, like, right, okay, we will program the artificial intelligence to do a certain task or to have a function or whatever the purpose is, but we still need that human component to it. And a lot of the things that I've been reading, and you might even see too as well during this time of the pandemic, artificial intelligence, there's been an increase in the amount of people looking to learn about it. It's been used to do contact tracing and a lot of the medical field, health, military, I mean, there's science, you name it, these different industries and areas of life are using AI to help them to do things in a different way or faster, or to get information and kind of sort through it. Now, machine learning is something that I learned about when I got my Spanish degree, and basically it came down to just learning about machine translation. And it goes and it analyzes, it finds patterns, and it improves over time, but it's not the same thing as artificial intelligence. Machine learning is a component of it. And then another key term is the neural networks. If you imagine our brain and how quickly we process thoughts and can sort through information and understand, that's what the neural network is. It's just the billions and billions of things. So if we have a question, I mean, if you do a Google search, how quickly you get results and how many millions of results are returned to you within less than a second. Sometimes if you would ask somebody that same question that you put into that search, it probably would take longer than that 0.23 whatever decimal second that you got those other results in. And so whenever you have all of this put together in this artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's just done so much faster. And then of course there's the deep neural network, and that's more complex, deep learning, a lot of processes. So artificial intelligence itself is quite complex, but the idea for us as educators is to be able to understand it just enough so that we can get our students and ourselves learning about it, what it might look like, how it might apply to our lives now and in the future in terms of education and in terms of work. Another key term that you might see, and often the NLP is something you might see instead of the full words of natural language processing, is when the computer, the artificial intelligence, can process the human language. So sometimes you might make a phone call if you're calling, say, the Apple store for help, and you don't realize that you're not actually talking to a human. It can mimic the conversations, it can engage in the conversations and process the language because it's been programmed to do that, even with speech recognition that we have. And so many of us probably rely on those features. If we have virtual assistants, voice assistants in our homes, on our phones, our devices, whatever, that speech recognition that it has is natural language processing. Deep learning, and so again, you have so much data and information that is being stored and filtered and sorted that there's no way, I mean, humans could do it. It's just that it takes so much longer as opposed to what you can do with the deep learning. And just as an example, with say Wikipedia, they have somewhere around like 1,300 bots that are specific to do like sorting and finding edits and are able to process millions and millions of edits within a day, compared to if it was an actual person sitting there trying to sort through the data. So all of these are pretty fascinating. And then another thing, this was something that I learned about, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago. We've all seen these codes, right? Maybe become a little bit irritated because you have the code and you either can't read it, or it's blurry, or you have to check off all the ones where you see like a traffic light or a roof or something. But what that CAPTCHA stands for is it's the words completely automated public Turing test. And Turing, there's a Turing test that goes back to Alan Turing, which I'll tell you about, that was able to determine whether you were interacting with a human versus a computer. And so whenever you go to websites, if you have to enter or check the box that says like, I'm not a robot, or you enter that code, that's how it's able to distinguish whether or not you're actually a person. So if anybody has ever, for example, the first place I started to see this was buying tickets for concerts. And a lot of times they get the automated programs to go in there and to try to buy all the tickets. And so whenever you're trying to get those tickets, like you can't get them. And so that's why they started to put that on there, because it avoided, or mostly avoided, people being able to mass buy all of those tickets that weren't actually people, it was computers buying up the tickets. So one way that I like to start with my students is, and I recommend this series, and I just have it here playing in the background, but it is the crash course. And my students really enjoy these videos. There are a lot of videos in the series, and they have them basic information. What is artificial intelligence? What are the components of it? How does artificial intelligence interact with video games? Can artificial intelligence be your coworker? I mean, all kind of interesting topics, but it's a good way to start, especially if you're just looking to get into learning about artificial intelligence yourself and to learn with the students. That's one thing that I really enjoy, is being able to learn with them, know enough just to get them started, but then to listen to their questions, their ideas, what they think is going to become the next step, what they are concerned about in terms of like ethics, like privacy, if there's bias, but then how they think that this can benefit or be beneficial to us as educators, for them as students, but even beyond that, you know, in life. And so one of the great video series that I definitely recommend that you check out. And once you go through there, you'll see that there is a big list of other topics. So depending on the course that you teach, maybe you just want to do a short intro into it. Or if you wanted to go further into the artificial intelligence, there are tons of options with the videos that you can use, and they're great for having students engage in conversation. I even had students this morning when I taught my STEAM class predicting some things for the future. And it's really interesting for me because I think back to when I was in 8th grade, and the technology really was not around then compared to now. So it's fun to make those predictions about how something like this might change our lives in the future and what ways it can benefit. And then of course, what are some of the things that we need to really be concerned about as teachers? And I will, throughout this, we'll pause and see if there are questions, but feel free. Beginning of artificial, just the dates. If anybody did see the movie I referenced, I, Robot, with Will Smith, it did talk about those 3 laws of robot. That was back in 1942. So even though for many of us, me, it wasn't something that I feel like I knew around. But now, once I started to key dates with the people and just see the growth of it, especially being from Pittsburgh, where artificial intelligence, there's so much going on in Pittsburgh now and in the past couple of years, it's really interesting to see how this has grown and all of the people that were involved in the start of it. So the Turing test, like I mentioned before, that was from 1950. So 70 years ago now is when he developed that test to decide if are you or are you not artificial intelligence? Can they imitate human behavior? And so there are activities that are out there that you can have students do that kind of go through a simulated Turing test and let it decide, is this a human or is this not? There's also some fun things you can do where artificial intelligence has created poems or works of art. And even just a couple of days ago, I saw how they're generating news. And so you really have to be careful with what we're reading, what we're sharing. But it's interesting to see if you read some of the poems, if you can find one of those sites, try and guess which one was written by a human versus artificial intelligence and see how it goes for you. Because I know when I first did that one, I did not do that well. I guessed wrong on almost every single one of them. But it was kind of interesting to think back, like even in 1950, so similar to our instant messaging today, that conversation. How many of you, when you would log into a website for the first time or you're shopping online, you have the messages that pop up and it's like a person that says, hey, I am so-and-so, I'm here to help you. But is it really that it's a person, or is it a chatbot? Has it been programmed into that? And so that's another interesting thing that you can do with your students, is have them create chatbots, but also kind of interact with some of those ones that do pop up on the websites and see what the responses are to the questions, because all of those responses and keywords have been programmed into it so that if you type something in, it can kind of filter through all of the information that's stored in there and give you a response similar to what a human would do. John McCarthy in 1955 first used the term artificial intelligence. And then there were periods of time where there was like growth in that area and then there was nothing in that area. But some interesting facts that I found as I've been doing research that I think are pretty important to kind of think about is, number one, when I read this one in 1924, these traffic cops in New York who were in charge of just manually switching the lights in the streets, many of them lost their jobs. So there was a big concern about all of these traffic cops when they went to the street lights and they didn't need them anymore, they were going to be out of work. But they weren't out of work totally, they were out of that job, they just transitioned into another type of work. And so thinking about it for the future, there will be changes in jobs and types of jobs, but people will move into different types of work. And so if something can be done by artificial intelligence, what I've been reading and learning is that then humans will shift to some other type of work, and that frees up time. CNET, which is a publication I got this from in September, was talking about the number of workers that would need to be retrained because of artificial intelligence. And there was an interesting survey that came out as well. And I'm trying to think back when it was, and I thought I had a note here, but it was something to the effect of around 65% of people that they surveyed said that they trusted working with a robot more than coworkers. And I thought that that was interesting to read that. And I'd be curious to know who they surveyed as well, but that was also in this article that I referenced. And then talking about that robots will replace humans for a quarter of the jobs by 2030. So in 10 years, that's the prediction. And 10 years seems like a far time in the future, but time really does go by quite quickly. One thing that I will reference is if anybody is looking for a book or something to learn more, especially in education, Michelle Zimmerman wrote a fantastic book called Teaching AI, and she has presented at a conference, FETC in Orlando, a couple of times, and I got to talk with her this year during a presentation, but she was interviewed last year and talked about the types of jobs, and that it's just that we need as teachers to help students to develop different skills, like to learn something, to unlearn and relearn. And that was also something that Sir Ken Robinson had referenced as well. And so helping ourselves to kind of like problem solve and then forget how to do things in a way so that we can find new ways to work through a challenge. And that's good for our students too. Predictions of artificial intelligence, how much it will grow. And the last one I thought was kind of interesting too, that only 70% of the companies felt a minimum impact by artificial intelligence. And there are so many things that we have to consider, but looking at the future of education, I came up with some different things, and it actually made up a word, depict, but how artificial intelligence might change and transform. And I guess really not just education. I mean, looking beyond that, like our communication, how we access things, if we buy things online, it's personalizing it to us. But these are just some of the ways that we might see and will see an impact in our role as educators when it comes to artificial intelligence in education. And so thinking about the ability, and there are tools and apps out there that really, we've used some of these game-based learning tools, but where students could all start on the same activity, But depending on the amount of time that it takes them to respond, whether their answer is correct or incorrect, it then in real time charts a different personalized learning path for each student. And one of those tools that is out there for it, and you may have heard of it, is called Socrates. And it's Socrates. I often want to say Socrates, but Socrates is based on and works with artificial intelligence. And so my students had an opportunity to try it out. And there were 3 of them sitting together, and they all started on the same exact activity, but based on the time that it took and their responses, it took them all in a different direction. So being able to kind of differentiate or personalize learning opportunities for our students, this is definitely something where it's already being put into place with some of the programs out there. This image is from the ISTE-U. If you're familiar with ISTE, it's the International Society for Technology and Education, but they have a course, and that's the one that I mentioned that I took. And it takes you through so many different ways to learn about AI. It has you creating, it challenges you to think about how you can bring this into your classroom. And it gives you a lot of ideas of what you could use with your students. And that's how I got started. But this graphic, which was from the course, I thought really did give a good glimpse of what we might expect when it comes to artificial intelligence in education. And so being able to have our students work together, to be able to have them have personal tutors through AI. There are a lot of benefits with it, but of course we have to be mindful of worrying about the privacy and all the data that's used in any of these tools that we use with our students. And so I will share that also. Now, thinking for a moment, and this is a great video that's out there too about the future. Like, if you think about artificial intelligence, I often think about over the course of time, even growing up, TV shows, movies, whatever our frame of reference is for thinking about like robots and technology and what's being used. And I don't know about anybody that's in here, but for me, I remember seeing black and white TV shows that had robots, or even growing up watching cartoons like the Jetsons, anything. If anybody wants to drop anything in there that you think of, I'd be really interested to learn from. But just seeing some of these images, I thought very, Roomba, how many of us have a Roomba in our house, or use Alexa, or have a Google Home, or have things programmed like with the smart home devices? If that's the way it is now, I mean, looking at some of these dates, even Star Wars, and going back to 1950s, Lost in Space is the one that I remember seeing. And if anybody else can relate to that as well. But these are things that we've had interactions with through media for many, many years. And now, thinking about the future, what's it going to look like in 10 or 20 or 30 years, or even beyond that, 70 years from now, looking at the Jetsons in 1962. It's amazing how many years ago that was compared to where we are now. So I think it's fascinating. And like I said, it's really great to interact with my students to see what their predictions are, and for them to come up with ideas of what their AI would be. And so this is a video that I can share in the chat after, as well, with some resources too, if you wanted to check it out later on. So types of AI, chatbots. As I mentioned earlier, if you've ever gone to a website, and I know this happened recently too, where you can't find a way to actually connect directly to a person. If you call on the phone, you go through all these processes and it's an automated voice and you're interacting with it, or if it's online and you're having a conversation, the chatbot has a name, but that doesn't necessarily mean, like, you can't tell if it's a human or if it is in fact a chatbot. And so many of us interact with these on a daily basis, but students can also, and I know teachers have also created chatbots to help in the classroom. In libraries, for example, where students may come in and there are certain questions that are common questions that are asked in a library, or even in your own classroom, you could, and that's one of the things I had to do in the ISTE course, program a chatbot to respond to those common questions, so that somebody is not sitting there responding to the exact same thing. The people coming in with the questions, or students, if they had questions, even say about a homework assignment or project, you could program a chatbot that students could enter questions and they would get the response they needed. Personal assistants. If any of you, I know that I was with a friend a couple of months ago, and her personal assistant came on and reminded her that she had something to do coming up in like 30 minutes. And she said that one time, it was later in the evening, and it said, "Amy, I think it's a little bit late now. Shouldn't you be going to bed, or something like that? And I said, that is a little bit, I don't know how comfortable I feel with that. But these are just some of the things that we interact with and rely on. I do have an Alexa in my home. It is unplugged most of the time, but I do plug it in, and I have tried a lot of different things with it. But it is nice if you want a quick fact, or even in the classroom, aside from the privacy, there is, if you want to check something out, it's called Ask My Class. They have a website, but it's an app, and it's been used in classrooms where teachers can have it ask my class to open the books, or ask my class to whatever the command is, and teach students about artificial intelligence and these voice assistants in the classroom in a way that's a safe way, that's private as well. But it can come in handy. For me as a language teacher, Google Translate and a lot of those other translation tools that are out there, artificial intelligence, video games. For my students in my STEAM course, I always want to try and make a connection with students. And sometimes, like, you never know when you're going to have that one opportunity. And a couple of years ago, there were a few students that I'd really tried to work with and learn about their interests and to make a connection, and it just wasn't working. And I just so happened to be walking around in my classroom, and I glanced down and I saw the book Ready Player One on the floor, and it was kind of between a couple of desks. So I didn't know who it belonged to. And I said, oh, whose book is this? And this one student said, that's mine. And I had read it, and I absolutely loved the book when I read it, because it took me all back to it was very nostalgic for me to read, if anybody has read it. And so I said, wow, it's a great book. And that was just, I mean, had I not looked down and seen it, that was the changing moment, because from that point on, that student connected more in the class, became interested in the content, especially because learning about artificial intelligence and the video games. So you never know, like, what is going to be that one thing that interests the student. And so I always think of that when it comes to video games for some of my students who, when we try to do our augmented virtual reality, for example, many of them at first are like, wow, we do this all the time. This is just Snapchat. And I say, it's not just Snapchat. Like, you can make comparisons, but having something to show, like, all of the different ways that we do interact with this attaches a little bit more meaning to students. So then they kind of get engaged in it in their own ways. Smart cars. So if you've used Uber or Lyft, or any of these other things like Amazon and all those autonomous deliveries that are happening, it is artificial intelligence that is making that possible. And so here's a top 10 list of ways that we are using every day artificial intelligence. So when I'm teaching, sometimes I won't share this with my students, but I'll say, okay, give me some ways that you think that you are interacting with AI every day, and see if they can come up with some of them. And then I also look at this list and I ask myself, how many of these am I actually doing every single day? And I usually come up with a pretty high number. Usually it's around 7. Lately it's been around 8, but I can say, and it surprises people, I have never watched Netflix. And so I don't see in the near future that I will have a 10 on this list, but it is interesting. And it's kind of nice. A couple of years ago when I was in New York, I was trying to make a purchase, and it was only for $30, but it kept getting declined, which was really embarrassing because everybody could hear that it was being declined. And so I got a phone call from American Express, and we had had a problem about 4 years prior to that with identity theft. And so there were these protections set in motion that, because I wasn't in Pittsburgh and I was trying to use a card out of where I had been using my card for however long before, it just automatically triggered that phone call, the decline of the card. And so I had to get on the phone and talk to somebody to say, yes, I was actually in New York trying to spend $30 at a store. And so some of those protections really are quite useful. And so common uses, I mean, categorically speaking, the speech recognition, learning tools, like I mentioned, which I'm going to share some resources with you and some things that you can even try out now, because one thing that I've learned, and a good friend of mine, Jamie Donnelly, says this often too, is like, if you don't try using them now when you're in the session or where you have the opportunity, we often walk away from those and kind of forget and don't get back to it. So it's always a good idea to open up a tab or something, or leave it open. And so when you sit down at your computer again or on your phone, that you get back to it. But how about smartphones and having it set settings for you or adjust things for you? And even in our homes, there are a lot of appliances and things now that can automatically change and work for us. I know that even when I log into things like YouTube or on Amazon, all those suggestions, And that's because the artificial intelligence is just learning and adapting based on what the choices are and the input that you're putting into whatever it is that you're using. And it can be quite nice because if you've ordered some books, then you have these suggestions for you because there's so many books out there. But based on the choices that you've made, it can sort through all of those options and give you some choices that might be of interest to you because it's kind of learned your pattern of behavior over time. Smart home devices. I often joke about this one and say, I'm totally fine with going and changing the temperature and adjusting the lighting. But with the artificial intelligence, it can learn our preferences. So if at certain points in the day, we turn the temperature up, we turn the lights down, it learns that and then takes on that for us over time. And again, those online services. So talking to students about what are the things that you're using? How is the artificial intelligence working in that? And having those conversations, it really does lead to a lot of interesting other ideas and to show them like, wow, I had no idea that that was artificial intelligence. And so the big thing about it and what makes it kind of complex is thinking, if we try to think about how it works, but thinking about ourselves, how we do different tasks in the work that we do and have conversations, or we write, or we cook, or anything, we go through all of this information and process it as well. The difference is that when it comes to artificial intelligence, and this I got from the book that Michelle Zimmerman wrote, and so there's more information in there, but it goes through all of that so much faster. So if you compare it to that Google search, the amount of time that you can get millions of results in less than a second versus the time that it would take us to kind of go through, that's where it tends to kind of edge out humans at some point in time. And that's what people have been tending to focus on. So where do you start with students? One that I recommend, and some people tend to know, is the IBM Watson. And IBM has a course, Chatbots for Good. So when I talked about making and creating a chatbot and having students create a chatbot, that is a good place to go, especially because if you're looking for ideas for bringing design thinking into your classroom, helping students to develop empathy and other just, creating instead of just consuming, that is a good opportunity, especially for students that want to learn about it. And then it gives them a chance to kind of go as far as they want to with it. And it's not that you have to know all of the things about it. And then thinking about Watson, if anybody ever saw the episode of Jeopardy where Watson played the game, and that was artificial intelligence. Another one that's really good, and I will show you some examples too, is Google AI Experiments. And my students absolutely love going to this site because there are a lot of options. I usually get them started with a few so they all have kind of the same experience to see how it works, but then they can go and explore on their own. Even there are options there for augmented and virtual reality as well, but students can decide on what experiments that they want to try and explore. They can also create, and then it's a good chance to let them start like with Quick Draw or the Semantras, and then have conversations like, well, what do you think makes it artificial intelligence, or what did it do, and have those conversations. And again, it's always interesting to hear their ideas and their take on it. So those are a few, and I will have a list of these again as well. Botsify is another one where students can ask questions to chatbots and even submit a quiz. So depending on if you're just getting started, I would say definitely go to the Google AI Experiments, and there are some other ones, but Botsify is another one that you can check into. There are a couple of websites that really offer a lot of free options and resources for students, for teachers, even for parents to explore. AI for All is free, and you can check that out. So now if you want to open up another tab and go and check some of these out, even the Google AI Experiments will be good too. But it's a good space where you know that you can find reliable information, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence, and it's free, and it gives opportunities for students to kind of explore on their own. Now, the one that you're seeing play on the screen, for some of my students who are really into music, they enjoy this Google Semiconductor, where it kind of watches you and you do the movements, and then it creates the music and you become the conductor of an orchestra. And so if you have students or yourself or teachers who are interested in music or are music teachers and are thinking like, I wonder what I could do with artificial intelligence, there are things that you can use out there that students can create their own music. Artificial intelligence is being used, like I said, to create works of art and poems, music. There was something in the news last week about music and lyrics to a song that it did. So lots of possibilities out there. MIT has some great research and also great resources. So if you want students to train their own robot, that is another one that I would recommend that you check out as well. And I'm going to pause there temporarily and stop sharing just to see in the chat if there are any questions here before I continue on really quickly. Yes, thank you for dropping the article from the World Economic Forum. That is one. There is an article that just came out on Getting Smart, and that's another resource that I'll share. Getting Smart has a whole series on artificial intelligence, and so I will be able to drop that link. Actually, I will do that right now before I go back to sharing, because it's a little bit easier to do. And if any of you have other resources to share, please by all means drop them in there, because I would love to see what you're finding and using in your own experience. Let's see here. There's that. Okay, so there's the artificial intelligence series, and I'm going to drop in, while I'm at it, the Google AI experiments link if you want to check that out as well. And I'll drop one more in here since I've stopped sharing, and let me put this one in. I didn't talk about this one yet, but I'll get to that one. And let me go back to sharing my screen and get back to my presentation here. Okay, so hopefully you can see the screen, and if somebody wouldn't mind, again, just drop it in the chat just to make sure that you can see the AI courses and coding activities, to let me know, because this one, definitely a lot of good resources. And I will, like I said, in the description for the session, the Learning Revolution session, I will add the link to this. Thank you, perfect. That has some links to the videos, and it has all of these, as you can see, they're in blue and they're underlined, they're hyperlinked, but it'll make it easier for you to go to. And I have that all in a document, so I will update that and share that with you. Or of course, if you have questions, feel free to send me an email or send a message on Twitter. I'd be happy to connect with you. I will also mention that there is a group on Facebook that talks about artificial intelligence, and the course that I took, the ISTU course, is available as an ongoing, so you can check that out as well if that's something that you're interested in. Again, like, that was really great for me to go through the whole process, to read the book, to have all these activities. And that's kind of between that course and conferences that I've been to, the work with my students, and then my own research to write some of those articles about artificial intelligence, is where I gathered all of this. And so a couple of different resources that you see, a few that I mentioned, but in Pittsburgh, they have the Ready AI Lab. And if you've ever heard of it, they have the Cosmo and the Calypso, which I do have some images that I'll show you, but they've been doing a lot of research and building curriculum. And I went there a few months ago and had a training session with Dave Turetsky, who is leading up the AI for K-12. If anybody is familiar with that, that's another site. So I have all of these later on as well, but it's really good for students. They have lessons. If you have the Cosmo or the Calypso, and you can have students see how these robots work, how they interact, and develop their own kind of projects and things. And this is what it would actually look like when I went there. And so that's Dave Turetsky, if anybody's familiar with Dave and the work that he has done with AI for K-12, but also in the work with the Cosmo. But when I was there, I went to the training session, and so you see the Cosmo robot, and then there are these blocks that have symbols and codes on them. So there's numbered blocks. And on the computer screen, you can see I'm in the corner, because at that point, the robot, which is in the middle picture on the top right, was looking at me, and it was showing on the screen what it was seeing in front of it besides the blocks. And so the students, when they work with these Cosmo and this program, they program it to do certain activities. And so they could create, say, a warehouse where this robot is going to go in and it's going to move boxes. And so using kind of the drag and drop, they program it like, when Cosmo sees box number 1, pick it up, or when it sees box number 2, move it to the side. It can also have emotions and have sound. So it was a lot of fun to go there and spend the day kind of interacting with this, but also to see some examples of what students have been doing. And in Pittsburgh, outside of Pittsburgh, there is Montour School District If anybody is familiar with or knows Justin Aglio, he is from Montour, and he has in his school district, they started the first middle school curriculum a few years ago. And so I went to their school when they had kind of like the grand showcase, the first event, and got to see students working with AI and music, working on ethics, and also some other projects, including Cosmo, and just hearing their ideas. And the students at that point were 7th and 8th, and I think some 9th grade students joined in just to kind of learn about it, since it was the middle school program. But it was fascinating to see how much they put into it and the different ways that the students decided to create and personalize it to what they were interested in. And so these are some of the resources I mentioned. Again, I will share the links to these all in one document. But the book that I referenced, Teaching AI by Michelle Zimmerman, is one that I usually carry. When I go to conferences, I usually carry it with me just because I like to share it with people, especially educators who are looking to get started with it, and having, what is AI? What is machine learning? What are some ways to have students explore and create? What are chatbots? All of these different topics that we hear. It is a very useful resource that you can get started with, and after you work through it, feel really comfortable and confident working with your students. If you want to know more about the background and the history and all the dates and all the people, Artificial Intelligence in Education is another book that goes through all of the transitions and changes. Fascinating to read, as I could see a lot of the work where it was being done throughout the world, but also in Pittsburgh, and then being able to explore some of those resources as well. A couple of the other ones that I mentioned. Looking online, there are, in a recent article for Getting Smart, we looked at the increase in enrollment in courses for artificial intelligence over the past couple of months, especially, timely with the pandemic. But there are a lot of courses that are out there for free. Now, Finland AI has a course that you can enroll in and work at your own pace. Of course, you're not going to get the certification since it's with Finland, but it is available in different languages. So you can take it in English and work through it and learn about it on your own. The WACI that's at the end, it's a World Artificial Intelligence Competition for Youth, and it has been held every year. This year, I haven't heard yet, or I may have missed it, but it was supposed to be held in Pittsburgh this summer. But every year, students go and create a lot of different, and just showcase what it is, that they have been creating with. And so I'm going to minimize that, and I'm going to go to show you a couple things here. So artificial intelligence on Getting Smart, like I said, that's where I started to learn about it and become really interested in it. They do have topics. And if you go to the topics and click artificial intelligence, you can see all of the recent, they have podcasts, examples. I have written a couple articles where I share some like really quick ways to get started with artificial intelligence. But if you're looking for some different courses to take or some facts and stats about it, I know that, and I'm going to click on this one because it was amazing. There are currently 300,000 people who are skilled and able to do work in artificial intelligence, and the demand is going to increase. By 58 million jobs will be available in AI and machine learning, according to the World Economic Forum. And when I found that out, I was amazed at the fact that there's only 300,000 people now qualified. So there has definitely been an increase in some of these online courses and platforms that you can use. Certainly you can go to like the AI for K-12 and look at the resources, the AI for All, but even that Finland course would be an option. And if I go back to my presentation here, these articles that I had written, the very first one I wrote was 2 years ago, I believe in January, but in each of those, I share some of the resources that I shared in here that you can get started with students. For the AI experiments, the ones that, and I'll pull this one up here, if you are actually doing this on your own right now, Quick Draw is one that's really fun that I start with my students so that they can see how it works. And they actually want to spend a lot more time on this one because they have so much fun. But what it does is it's a neural network, and it recognizes and it learns to adapt to doodling. So if you click on Draw, so you're supposed to draw a spreadsheet, and if you start drawing things, you can see the words at the bottom, and so it got spreadsheet. And so you kind of just go, and so in 2 seconds, it got the ocean. And so sometimes you get to draw a straight line. And sometimes the students had to draw this really detailed animal. And it was kind of funny to see them sitting side by side thinking like, wait, I have to draw a straight line and you have to draw this, whatever the animal is. So that is a quick way to get started with it. There are other ones that you can use under the Google AI experiments. I also have all students start with, but if you look under experiments, there are some for writing, with art, all kinds of different options that you can do, and for students to explore. Or they can even have the option, depending on the age of your students, to submit their own experiment. But lots of options to explore for them. Even like the Teachable Machine is another one that I recommend, where you basically, it learns to interact with you. It uses the webcam and you train it to do different things. And so it's a machine learning model, but it recognizes your face and your poses and the sounds and all of that. And students can like build their own and train it. So another option that you can explore. This one is kind of amazing. If anybody has ever heard of this website where it guesses who you are thinking of in terms of a real or fictional character. And the first time that I did this, I thought, okay, who can I think of? And being a Spanish teacher, I thought of Don Quixote. And if anybody knows or has ever heard of Don Quixote, I thought there is no way that this is going to be guessed by this. And it was. As you go through, you pick the character and it has different questions. And so you answer them. And sometimes like you may not know, like if you pick an animal, you may not necessarily, like my students said, I don't know. And I said, well, just answer don't know. Or if you feel like probably or probably not, but it goes through and it tries to guess. Now it has all of the information. It's been programmed to respond and sort through all of the different responses that you get. So we've seen these in drawings where it's like, and if this, then that, or okay, here's the question, go through, yes, go this way, no, go this way. And it just keeps plotting. But the amount of time, if we played this guessing game with friends or family or students versus doing this online, but to see how many times, like who can you think of, what can you think of, and how many times does it take for it to actually guess correctly who you were thinking of? And for me, like I said, when I was thinking of Don Quixote, it took about, I think it was 15 or 16 times, but right around maybe the 8th or 9th guess, I started to see a change. And I realized, I thought, it's going to guess Don Quixote. I don't know how, but it's going to get it. And it did. And now I've had friends who guess, I mean, I think of the president, so Donald Trump, and it took a while, but you could see some of the questions towards the end when it was getting closer to guessing. And I think my friend that did that, it was somewhere in the 30s, but students then would get engaged in saying, well, see who you can think of and who can have the most, like how many tries it could take for it to be predicted. And I think one of my students, I can't remember what they were thinking of, but it was around 40. Now, one time they were trying to have it guess their classmate that was sitting next to them. And I said, I don't know that that's going to work, but it was fun to see the questions and the interactions. Then they have the conversations follow up after that as well. And so that is one that I would recommend. And then going back to the presentation, some of these other ones, like I will share those links, but if I were to type in the AI for all, the things that you can find, I mean, resources, articles, open learning, and information, it's just so freely shared. And also the AI for K-12 has a forum, so you can get involved in their emails and find out all the different things that are happening. But scrolling through to find out the different programs that they have, whether it's online, but it is free. And so that is something I definitely look at just to know what all of the resources are that are available. So if you wanted to find out more, like if you're teaching art or you're teaching about sciences, or especially now looking at the pandemic and how it's being used, just in Pittsburgh, as an example, one of the professors from Carnegie Mellon reached out to find different educators and different programmers and people to be involved in making an app. And it just got released onto Google Play and iOS, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago now. It's called Novid, and it's for, you know, contact tracing, but brought people together. And so it's interesting to see how that's being done, even in terms of with facial recognition. In some countries, like in China, and I believe in Russia, they were using facial recognition to identify people who were trying to break out and, you know, avoid the stay-at-home orders, for example. But of course, when it comes to those things, we're looking at considerations like privacy and if there's any bias involved, especially when it comes to the facial recognition, and sometimes it can be misidentified. But looking at the potential, I mean, it's been around, like facial recognition it's not something new. It has been around for many years, but the use of it was just limited to more like law enforcement for crimes and investigations like that. And so things that we can consider is our students in the future. What are the types of work that they're going to be doing? We look at some videos that are using AI and even, you know, they're robots. And one of them, I ask students like, well, how do you think this could benefit the military? And they say, well, instead of sending people in to send in the supplies or whatever the soldiers or the family or the people need, they have this artificial intelligence that can go and navigate on its own without having to have humans there, which of course, definitely they say it's safer for humans to send the robot in, but of course you have to program. So lots of things to consider, lots of tools to use. But if I were to say where to start, it's always looking at the definition, having students engage in ideas like, how is it used? Where do you see this in your daily life? Are you interacting with it? What are the benefits? What are the concerns and considerations that we need, especially with the ethics and privacy? And then having a couple tools, like you don't have to do all of the things, but just give a couple for them to interact with it and then have those conversations. And like I said, it has been fun in my 8th grade class to be able to do that and see what they come up with. And let me go back over here and I'm going to pull up my contact information and then I'll see if there are other questions. And like I said, like maybe I didn't say it yet, but I'm not an expert. I'm always learning and I'm always looking at every day. I get alerts and new ideas and things that are coming through with artificial intelligence and machine learning and a lot of topics related to education. So there is so much out there. And for me, I didn't see where I could bring that into my classroom or if I even should. But what I've learned over the last couple of years is that it is a huge part of our daily lives and will continue to be so because of all the growth and the need that we see that it's continuing to grow and will over the next however many years, especially with those statistics about the number of jobs that will be available in only a few years. And so I need to find ways to bring it in. So for me as a language teacher, looking at the Google Translate or even using the Akinator to have my students think about Don Quixote, for example, and look at the prediction. Having my students create a chat bot or for me to create a chat bot to answer questions. And I did that for my Spanish class, just basic conversation that they could interact and see what it was like. And can you tell that it's a chat bot and why, what makes it different? And so I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are any questions. And I thank you all for dropping in. Yeah, so my email and my Twitter, the RDENE915, and I'm often well, a lot of times I'm called Renee, but it's actually just parts of my name, Rachelle Dene. And the 915 goes back to my very first email address, which was with AOL, if anybody can relate to all the dial up and waiting and the speed. But I was not original. My parents created their email account and used their birth date at the end. And so 915 is just my birth date. So very consistent. So thank you for asking, but I'm looking through to see anything else that anybody added in. Oh, thank you for adding the dialogue, the Google one and the World Economic Forum. And yeah, let's see, I did have another question here. Copyright in AI. Amanda asked that. Yeah, can you specify a little bit more what you mean by that question, just to make sure that I answer it right. And I really appreciate everybody joining in, especially on a Friday. And I'm going to stop recording.